Of a truth, I say unto you that this poor widow hath cast in more than they owe. For all these have of their abundance cast in unto the offerings of God, but she, of her penury, has cast in all the living that she had.
Know where it's found. Some of you know about this woman who gave her 2 mites. What made this woman generous? Think about it. What made this woman generous? Was it the amount she gave? Well, you saw the other guys standing there. They're dropping in tons of coins, and she drops in 2. Was it the fact that she was a poor widow? Does that make her generous because she gave her 2 mites? Or is it the fact that she gave everything she had? And I would argue, no, none of those. None of those are what made this woman generous. What made this woman generous is because she already had a generous heart. Because most of us, if we have our 2 mites, are you putting it in the treasury? Come on now, be honest. We live in America. You're not putting it in, are you? I'm keeping those 2 mites because what am I going to do? I'm going to put it in the bank. The Sound of Music, not Sound of Music. What's the one? Oh, my stars. Just Saving Mr. Banks. What's that music? Miss Mary Poppins. There we go. Just like Mary Poppins, and they want to spend the toppings on feeding the birds, When their dad wants them to do what? Put it in the bank. If it's me in America, 2015, I'm not putting my 2 mites in that treasury. Just being honest. I'm keeping the 2 mites. I'm going to put it in the bank, and hopefully at the interest rate of 1%, I'll have enough money in about 1 million years to be able to live off of. But what made this woman generous was her heart. It wasn't the fact that she was old and she was poor and that she gave the 2 mites. Yeah, those all factor into it. But she already had a generous heart before she got up to giving that, right? Because why did she come to, she gives that to God. And literally, in the Jewish culture, they were giving that money to God. It was in God's treasury. It was God's money already. Now, we don't know what happened to the woman after she gave the 2 mites. But I do know Jesus used that as a teaching moment to say, hey, this is what a generous heart looks like. It comes way before you come on a Sunday morning. We do. Jesus says, if you saw it, Jesus said, at least I heard him say, he didn't say it in words. But Jesus said she is probably the richest person or was the richest person on earth. We have such a warped view of what it means to be rich, don't we? We think what it means to be rich is what? To have a lot of what? And a lot of what? From last week, a lot of what? Stuff. More money and the more stuff you got, the richer you are. And that's what we equate when we see people, driving certain cars, or we see they have certain things, or they have a certain brand of phone, or they got to be rich. We have such a warped view of what it means to be rich. And just because you have a lot of stuff, you can afford a lot of stuff, we all know, hopefully, if you would follow Christ for any length of time, you know that having a lot of stuff doesn't make you rich. But we equate riches with owning, with money and owning stuff. We do. It's just what we do. We live in America, Well, get this. If you make $37,000 a year, you're in the top 4% of wage earners. You make $42,000, you're in the top 1% of wage earners. If you're on fixed income, you're in the top 40% of wage earners. If you make $50 a week, you make more than half the world. When I had a paper route, I was told that I made more than 75% of the world. A paper boy. And if you live in America, do all of you live in America? Anybody from a foreign country this morning? Okay, all right. So all of us live in America. From a money point of view, there is no doubt that each of you are rich. Well, Pastor, you don't know how much money I make. I don't need to know how much money you make. You live in America. Even the poorest of poor are richer than the poorest of poor across the world. You know, they don't have a St. Martin's where you can get a meal, 3 meals every day, free medical care. They have to walk miles in some countries. Folks, I mean, if you live in America, you are rich. And our problem is, according to Andy Stanley in his book called Be Rich, the problem is we don't feel rich, do we? We don't feel rich. We have an appetite for status and security. To make us feel rich, we become stuffaholics, statusaholics, and securityaholics. We just can't get enough. And because we don't have those things, we just don't feel rich. And because we're not satisfied with the stuff we own, the status we have, or the lack of security we feel, what do we feel? We feel poor. If only if I had that. If only, you know, like last week, you know, you heard me, you know, we talked about, you know, if you made like, you know, $15,000 or 20, or I can't remember what it was, $35,000, all you would need, if you could really have what you really wanted was $50,000. And if you had $50,000, all you really need is $150,000. You know, that was a survey done by Roper, the Roper organization. And they say we never get enough. We never feel rich because we're such stuffaholics, we're such statusaholics, and we're so securityaholics that we will never feel rich. We will always feel poor because, fill in the blank. Well, Warren Buffett, if you don't know who he is, he's a billionaire a few times over. I don't know if he still is the richest man in the world. He's up there. He's either 1, 2, or 3. But you know, he makes billions of dollars a year, and you know he always lets the other person pick up the check. He makes $1 billion, multiple a year, and he always lets the other person pick up the check. And you know why? Because he always thinks he's poor. He always feels poor. Come on, Mr. Buffett. Pick up my $5 hamburger, would you? But he always feels poor. He never feels he has enough. You know, and the status he has is, you fill in the blanks again. And as we learned last week, we are to be rich in our relationship with God. But if you're a stuffaholic, if you're a statusaholic, or you're a securityaholic, well, it's impossible to have that rich relationship with God. It is impossible. You can't do it. Just like an alcoholic can't drinking unless they have accountability. You know, us, you know, when we live in America, stuffaholics, and we like status, and, you know, we like feeling secure. Folks, the only place where you're going to feel secure is in a relationship with Christ. Amen. Buy all the stuff you want. Have the latest gadgets. They're not going to meet that need for Christ. They can't. They're not designed to. They're designed to make you feel good and to give you what? Status. Let's see, do I got it? Shoot, no. I got cell phone 4. Most of you think, why don't you grow up and get a 6? I don't want to grow up, so there. I like my 4. I'm happy. You know? But if you got the 6, you got what? Status. My wife gets C's all the time. Man, look at that little tablet you got there, you know? You know, it's a status thing, and it's a thing that, you know, we don't say that, but it really is that, you know, advertisers they're not dumb, you know. They know what makes you tick. They know more about you than you know about you. They know what you will buy and what you don't buy. It's about status, and they sell that stuff like that. But as Christ followers, we are to have a relationship with him. And when you have a relationship with him, folks, this is how you know you have a relationship with him. Get this. He gives you a generous heart. Yeah, he does. I had to work on being generous. You know, I admitted I'd keep the 2 mites. I wouldn't throw them in the treasure. Are you kidding me? I've had to work at being generous. I had to allow God to work in me and, you know, and to see a need and say, okay, God, am I to meet that need? I'm not like my brother Jim or my sister Gloria who, you know, who just give and give, you know, even when it hurts. I've had to work at being generous. But when you have that relationship with him, when you have a rich relationship with him, he gives you a generous heart. You invest in others, and you trust that he'll provide for everything you need. A generous heart was the hallmark of the first century church. Read Acts. I'm not going to read all of it to you today. And this is why their generous heart was make them so effective. If you read Acts, what do you always see people doing? Thousands came to know Christ. And they walked into a village, and people came to know Christ. People, were changed. Well, that's what was going on. The first century church was so generous. They weren't rich in resources, but they were generous with what they had. They would care for the sick when a plague came. In pagan nations, which, were people who didn't believe there was one God, the pagan priests would leave their sick behind. Meanwhile, the Christians would come in and take care of them. And as the pagans' health returned, many of them abandoned their idolatrous ways or gave up their pagan ways, their unbelief, and they came to know Christ and became, what we would call today a Christian. And during the times of plague, these other religious leaders, you know what they would do? They skipped town, because why? They didn't want to get sick. They would leave their town, but the Christians would come and they would stay, risking their own health. Many would die. But you know what? The news of their generosity spread like wildfire. You'll remember flyer more than you will fire, won't you? The news of the gospel spread like wildfire. Why? Because of their generous hearts. Maybe we can take a clue from them. What do you think? You think the world, looking at you picture the world looking back at the church. What do they see? Anti-this, anti-that, anti-this, anti-that, anti-this, anti-that. That's all we are. To those outside looking in, that's all we are, is a bunch of antis. What if we were to become known for our generosity? Do you think that would change somebody's heart? It worked 1,900 years ago. But their generosity, the news of their generosity spread like wildfire. They gave time, money, and resources, all for the sake of making more and better disciples, all for the sake of someone coming to know Christ. They invested in people's lives because they wanted to see them transformed. The generosity of the church in the first century, and those that have followed suit, many who have done that, have literally changed the world. We don't sit here today if those people don't do what they did. But it was not their stuff that changed the world. You get the point? It's what they did with their stuff that changed the world. Or changed one person's life. You don't like to think that big. So this is from experience. How does one become generous? It's easy, folks, really easy. Well, it begins by having a rich relationship with God. That means inviting him into your heart and saying, Lord, I want you to be the master of my life. I want you to be the master of my finances, my stuff, my job, my attitude. I want you to be the master of everything that I am. That's having a rich relationship with God. And because folks, we all know, those of you who were last week, we all know that's all that matters to God. Our stuff, our money, and our schedules, folks, don't really matter to God. They really don't. We make a big deal about it. Oh, if I only spent a half hour more in prayer, I'd be more religious. No, that's not what he's asking. He wants your heart. He doesn't want your religion. He doesn't want your stuff. He wants your heart. He doesn't want your money. He wants your heart. As soon as we can get that in our thick head, as soon as we can get that in our stubborn heart, the heart's here, isn't it? As soon as we get that, folks, I guarantee you, your relationship with God would be more rich. You'll be able to stand it. People won't be able to stand you either. What matters to God is the condition of our hearts. How does one become more generous? You become generous from understanding everything you own has been given to you. Your cars, your house, your money has been given to you by God. We like to take credit for it, because I earned it. Sorry, no, you didn't. It was given to you by God. I know enough poor people who work hard. It was given to you by God. We didn't earn anything. But we like to take credit for it. It's God who opens, folks. If you've lived any length of time, you know it's God who opens and shuts doors. God controls it all. As much as we think, we control it, folks, we haven't the slightest clue, if we're honest. He's in control of it all. And folks, you become generous by understanding that there's no way you can pay God back for the job you have, the car you own, the money you make, and the stuff you own. We can't pay God back, but we can use our resources in the life of others. Because when you tangibly invest in the life of other people, they begin to experience the love of God through you. Wouldn't that be awesome? We take our resources. As hard as it is, oh man, I got to put those 2 mites in. But when you invest it in the life of others, where it's given in the offering plate or given to someone someplace, somewhere on your own to wait or whatever it is, folks, they experience the presence of God because we serve a generous God. Look at you and me. We deserve death, and what did he give us? Anybody want to guess? Life. I think that's pretty generous. But you become generous by understanding that there's no way you can pay back God. If you want to put it in a pay back God category, go invest in someone else your resources, no matter what you have. She agrees. See, being generous is not something you have to do to get into heaven, just so you know. The scriptures do teach us it was the generosity of the first century church that began to turn the world upside down. But if you're not generous, is it going to keep you out of heaven? Well, let me ask you this question before that. Do you have a relationship with God? Maybe that's why you're not generous. Or maybe you thought you prayed that prayer, but, as we say, it didn't really stick, so to speak. But it does begin with that's really the first question. Do you have a relationship with God? But if you do have that relationship, not being generous doesn't keep you out of heaven. Like I said, but it will turn the world upside down. The early church folks, this is what I loved about the church in the book of Acts. And I'm not saying we can't be like that anymore. We can't do it. We're just not in that time period. But the early church wasn't motivated by building buildings. They weren't motivated by starting programs or hiring staff or owning church vans. Folks, that was not their motivation. They were motivated by loving people into the kingdom of God. It didn't matter what it cost. Have you read the book of Acts? They sold everything they had and they put it in one pot. Would you do that? I don't know if I would or not. To be honest with you, I don't know how I'd answer that question. But because of their generous hearts, do you see what happened? If you read that, they weren't motivated. They didn't sell their stuff because, oh, man, we need another church van. We need a new septic out there. Man, $15,000. They weren't motivated by that kind of stuff. What were they motivated by? Thank you. They wanted people to know who Jesus was. They wanted people to know that Jesus loved them. This I know, for the Bible tells me so. Little ones to him belong. They are weak, but he is strong. And that's the song. They didn't sing it then, but that's the song they were singing. Jesus loves you, this I know. Why? Because my Savior told me so. And you belong to him. You see their motivation? And they sold it all. Now, we don't have to do that today. Or maybe we should. But that was their motivation. Is that our motivation, folks? Because if that is our motivation, I guarantee you a generous heart follows. Because your motivation is what? Boy, I want that person to see the love of God because I know the love of God that changed me is going to change them as well. What if we got passionate about that? You hear what I'm saying? Church, do you hear me? Do you hear the words? And to put this all in simpler terms, they were motivated to reach others with the good news. Because that's really all that matters, right? That's really all that matters. And why did they keep? And why did they? What they gave? Why they gave what they gave was to keep the good news in front, in the face of the world, because that's all that mattered. It mattered because all their resources. It mattered, their giving mattered because all their resources were invented in the life of others. And some even went into pagan or unbelieving countries, sat with sick people, got their sickness and died. And I've learned over the last 25 years of ministry that giving generously and tithing has become an option for many Christ followers. I know it's the time in which we live. People make it an option. But if you're a Christ follower, folks, it's not an option. It's called disobedience. Well, Pastor, you're just saying that to guilt me into giving. No, I don't do that. I don't try to manipulate no one. That's just what the Word says. But I've learned over the last 25 years, giving generously and tithing, boy, it really has become an option for those who follow Christ. And, in 2005, George Barna, who's a big survey guy, did a study on why people do not give more. He said this trend is influenced by the following factors. And this is done all over the country. It's not just in Marion, Indiana or Indianapolis, but the whole country. He said this trend is influenced, why people don't give more or why they don't give at all. Some people lack the motivation to give away their hard-earned money because the church has failed to provide a compelling vision for how the money will make a difference in the world. I can guarantee you from this pulpit and from me and our staff, folks, that money is invested in the life of people. We encountered close to 1,000 people last summer. It's invested in people. Some see their giving as a leverage for the future. Some don't give because they're mad at the pastor or mad at the church or somebody. But some see their giving as a leverage for the future. They withhold money from the church because they do not see a sufficient return on their investment. Are you kidding me? I just want to, some people, at least here, not this church, but people would say that about this church. Another thing, some people do not realize the church needs their money to be effective. Let me tell you, we need your money to be effective. Done. All right. They don't realize the church needs their money to be effective, that their church has done an inadequate job of asking for money, so people remain oblivious to the church's expectations and potential. Others, number 4, are ignorant of what the Bible teaches about our responsibility to apply God's resources in the way that affects our lives. Does your giving affect your life? Does your giving affect you to give up something? Does it? Is it affecting your life? You're giving on a Sunday morning. Does it affect the way you live your life? Does it change your buying habits? Does it change the way you look at the world? Does it do anything inside of you? Does it cost you anything? Number 5, the final, this category finally contains those there's just some of us who are just selfish. They figure they worked hard for their money. It's theirs to use as they please. Their priority revolves around their personal needs and desires. Boy, if you don't give, how would you answer that survey? Where would you fall, 1 through 5, if you don't give? Selfishness. My money, do what I want. Or you just don't understand it's supposed to affect your life, what you give. All of those things. I mean, this is done, 2,000 people. It's a pretty good survey, scientific survey. How would you answer that question if you don't give? And if you do give, what's your motivation? Well, there's some myths there's some myths that many people believe, which hinder their understanding of why giving matters. Here's myth number one. You're giving to the church. Folks, that is a flat-out lie. Yeah, you're putting in the offering plates. Don't believe that myth. Malachi 3:10 reminds us that the church is just a storehouse. We receive an offering and we invest in this offering, the life of the church, and into the community. That's what we do here. We do that here. We really do. Ask the staff. It's on the back of your bulletin. That's what we do. We invested in our community, and we invested, in the lives of the people here. And the second myth, you're giving to the pastor. Just because you hand me a check doesn't mean you're giving me, you're not giving to the pastor. You're not paying, well, I do get a salary from you, I guess. But you're me and our staff just facilitators of the offerings received. If you look back to the Old Testament, you discover that the tribe of Levi was responsible for the temple, and they were responsible for taking care of it, the things that happened in it. And the other tribes gave a tenth. This is the Old Testament. They gave a tenth to them so they could fully focus on the temple. And, our giving helps us, I honestly believe, our giving helps us to focus solely on the mission, which is to make for us 2015 is to make more and better disciples. And our vision here, what drives everything that we do, is seeing lives transformed. That's why we do what we do. We invest to see lives, people transform. And when we don't see it, we talk about it, evaluate it. Why isn't it happening? What are we doing wrong? What are we not praying? What's going on? But those are myths. Well, the last myth is, you're giving it back to God. Oh my gosh. I hate that. I hate that. That line of thinking, you're giving back to God. Folks, He already owns it. You're not giving it back to Him. He needs nothing from us. How can you give back to stuff or money you don't own? The church in the first century never looked at their stuff as their stuff. They knew it didn't belong to them. The widow knew those mites didn't belong to her. That is why they could be so generous to each other and to the unbelievers around them. But you're not giving back to God. We like to make us feel good, doesn't it? I know a church that you can write in the page to the order of, you can write Jesus in there. I think it's kind of cool, actually, because it reminds, okay, man, this is a sacrifice. This is, I don't think you're giving it to Jesus. I don't think you're giving it to God. But God just says give. Why? Boy, so we can go invest in the life of other people. Not so we can keep the lights on or buy a new video projector, or have a snowplow and make us feel more comfortable. No, folks, no. We give because we want to see life change. We want to see people come to know Christ. We want to see lives transformed. We want to see people healed. We want the blind to see and the deaf to hear and the mute to talk. At least I do. That would be kind of cool. But you're not giving back to God. But when you give, you're giving to invest it back in others. And when you give, you're investing in making more disciples. When you give, you're investing in lives being transformed. And folks, giving matters because we're part of a much bigger story. If only we could keep that in the front of our mind. Giving matters because we are part of a much bigger story. Keeping the story of Jesus' birth, death, resurrection, ascension into heaven was the priority of the early church. That's what their motivation. They were motivated to give generously because they believed in what Jesus says. Otherwise, why would they give? Come on, church. Why would they give? If they didn't believe in the message that Jesus was telling, why would they sell everything they have and let other people use it? Why would they do that? My only conclusion, and perhaps there's thousands of others, but the conclusion I came to was that they believed that the message of Jesus was true. That's what motivated them. They believed the message is true. Do you believe the message is true? Well, yeah, Pastor, I do. Okay, do you tithe? Well, Pastor, I have so many bills. I have this. Pastor, you don't understand. You don't understand how my life is. It doesn't make a difference how your life is. Are you motivated by people knowing who this Jesus is? You don't have to give money to do that. But we'd be richer for it if we would do that sometimes. Giving matters is because we're part of a much bigger story. And if we don't keep telling the story, Marion First Church of God, if we don't keep telling the story, shame on us. Why let the Wesleyans have all the fun? Shame on us. Because if we're not committed to telling the story, why give? Why pay me to be here? Why have youth and children ministry here? Why have these great videos, teaching videos we have? If we're not committed to keeping this story going forward, what's the point? Unfortunately, it requires money here. Back then, it was sheep and cattle and all those good stuff. Giving matters because we're part of a much bigger story. And when you tithe or when you give generously, folks, you're not the first one. We are joining the millions of people before you who believed in this message. They believed the message was important. They believed the message gave hope to a dark world. That's why we sit here, because some people believe that the message of Jesus was important. Started in a saloon because they believed the message of Jesus was important. Moved to Boot Street, bigger building. Why? Because they believed, at least I hope they did. I'm pretty sure they did. They believed the message of Jesus was important. They came here, somebody gave this land for some small amount of money. Why? Because I believe they wanted to keep the message going and keep the message in front of the people. That's our motivation to do what we do and to give what we give. Giving matters because it demonstrates in a tangible way that He is truly Lord of our stuff. To me, there's really no other visible sign of Him being Lord of our life other than seeing the changes in the person's heart. Because that changes the outward stuff too, doesn't it? You don't keep doing the same things outwardly if you're changed inwardly. James 1:17 says, whatever is good and perfect comes from us, from God our Father, who created all the lights in the heavens. He never changes or casts a shifting shadow. Folks, this is the reason why He wrote this stuff. God knows we're attached to our stuff. God knows we're attached to our money. And to give it away as an outward sign of an inward commitment of making Jesus the Lord of your life. So how do you know who or what is the Lord of your life? Well, if your money or stuff are the Lord of your life, you believe you're entitled to more. I've earned it. I'm entitled to more. If Jesus is the Lord of life, well, giving 10% or more, 10% is just the guideline. Or giving to others is not a big deal. It's the norm. When you're a Christ follower, it becomes the norm. Giving matters because, Acts 20:35 says, it's more blessed to give than to receive. Think about this for a moment. When you give a gift to someone, who's more blessed? Come on now. Come on, parents. When you buy gifts for your kids, who's more blessed, you or them? Come on. You are. Because what do they do with the toy 2 weeks later? It's broken, it's in the garbage, runs out of batteries, you forget to buy them. Gets thrown in the corner. So who gets blessed by that? And when you buy a gift for a friend, who is more blessed, they or you? Thank you. The giver is. Do you see that? That's why Jesus says in Acts, it's more blessed to give than receive, because you are the one. It's not about blessing them. It's about having the opportunity to feel the blessings of God in you. How cool is that? Maybe not that cool. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the giver. You know, if you're a parent, grandparent, aunt, uncle, cousin, you know, or just a friend, you know, when you buy that gift, you know why you do it. You know, they don't really need it. Come on now. What do we need in America? You got a roof and water and food. What else do you need? The rest of the stuff is just superfluous. Why do we do it then? Why do we buy these gifts and we give them? Because we're the one who's blessed. You see the excitement in their eye, the joy in their face. Makes your heart skip, doesn't it? At least it does mine. Because they're experiencing something that's been going on inside of you. When giving matters, folks, you also plan accordingly. You know, you just don't hope the money will be there. You plan the money on being there, don't you? At least smart people do. You know, they plan on the money being there. And Paul gave us that plan. You read in Corinthians, on the first day of each week, Sunday, set aside a portion of the money you have earned. How complicated is that? So where's the problem? In our what? Anybody want to say it? Somebody say that word. Thank you. The problem is in our hearts. God knows we're attached to our stuff. Don't lie to me. God knows you're attached to your money. That's why you put it in the bank and save it. He knows we're attached to that stuff. He really does. But what's the condition of your heart? Giving matters because when you freely give, you freely receive from God. That's, you know, Luke 6:38 says, "Give and you will receive. Your gift will return you, and your gift will return to you in full, pressed down, shaken together, to make room for more, running over and poured into your lap. The amount you give will determine the amount you get back." Holy cow! You're stingy? Proverbs 11:24 says, "Give freely and become more wealthy. Be stingy and lose everything." I'm always a big believer. He says, "Give freely and become more wealthy." Watch this little clip.
Temperature 72 degrees. Wow, nice. Voice activated and gray gas managed.
Better choose voice activated or gray gas managed.
Be like, please to protect or serve.
Praise, thank. Let me give you some of these.
We have a delicious sea bass.
They're the roasted vegetables, all right. And better.
Folks, and is better. You give freely, you receive freely. And you receive freely. And is much better. I think everybody would agree that that's better, you know. You know, the generosity of the first century church changed the world and changed each of our history here. They took care of unbelievers who were abandoned, left to die, and gave freely of their resources to others. And that "and" means going the extra mile. If you're a Christ follower, going the extra mile. And if you're a Christ follower, it means giving the extra dollar. And when we go the extra mile and we give the extra dollar, we do it because of God's generosity towards us. Because God's generosity towards us has changed us. God loves and sent his son. He just didn't love us. He says, and sent his son. God gave freely to us and will not let those who believe in him perish. In return, he tells us to go the first and second mile, to love our neighbor and our enemy, tells people to give up everything and what? And follow him. And it's better. According to God, it's better too. So let me get personal here for a minute. Giving matters because we need to do it. You know, all throughout Old Testament, New Testament, you read about giving, sacrifice, generosity, sharing, kindness to others, looking to the interests of others, and sharing with one another. Folks, those of you who read us every day. And I ask, why were they so generous? I think, this is me, They knew they were part of something much bigger. They believed that Jesus mattered. Not only did they give up resources, but some of them literally gave up their life because they believed Jesus mattered. They believed that Jesus could make a difference in the life of others. And folks, I believe that Jesus matters. I give because I believe the message of Jesus can make a difference in the life of another person. I believe that with all my heart, and that's why I give. Giving doesn't keep church, I don't give to keep church doors open, to keep lights on, or even to keep ministry going. I give because Jesus matters. It keeps the story moving forward. The story, when we give, it keeps the story moving forward, and it keeps changing lives. It keeps the good news in the face of others. It matters to me because I know I'm part of something much bigger. It matters to me because I want more and better disciples. It matters to me because I want to see life transformed. That's my motivation. Honestly, that is my motivation. What are you motivated by? To keep the lights on? That's good. Keep paying me? That's great. Don't stop giving. In your bulletin, I don't know if everybody got a bulletin, and I think about it. Is my wife anywhere around? Yeah. I have some cards in there. Can you grab those just in case some people need them? I made some extra ones. I got one in my wallet or in my thing here. Folks, I don't ask for much here. Well, I ask for your commitment, obviously, but I'm asking you for a commitment. This morning, if you've never tithed before, if you've never or given generously before, tithe, the generous part is beyond 10% in my book. But here at the Marion First Church of God, we believe in tithing. Some of you grew up in it. And tithing, as described by the Scripture, is 10%. You don't let 10% mess up your mind. It's just where it begins. And that's why I give. I don't give because I have to, because I'm the pastor and I need to be a good example. I don't give for those reasons. I cannot give and not feel guilty. But I really believe in when I give. Maybe because I see it. We invested in the life of others. I'm committed to investing in the life of others. And I'm asking you to commit to the life of others. You're rich. Like I said, a paper boy is richer than half the world. You are rich. So I ask you this morning to wrap all this.